In today's video, I want to discuss some NHL trade rumors and some items we might see happen during the NHL offseason, including the latest on the Montreal Canadiens. Could GM Marc Bergevin be looking to make a big splash with some big trades this summer? And what is the future of head coach Claude Julien? Plus, I also want to take a look at the future of longtime goaltender Henrik Lundqvist with the New York Rangers. And we also have some other rumors circulating on teams like New Jersey and Anaheim on some more moves they might make for their rebuilding efforts. We'll get into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now I know we're not all that far removed from the NHL trade deadline, but there's still lots of information circulating through the NHL rumor mill on a lot of things that we might be seeing happen as the NHL offseason is really not all that far away, especially for the teams that are not going to be making this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. For many of these teams, the offseason is really only about 5 or 6 weeks away, and we could see a heavy activity, I think, of trades during the summer. Now, in my opinion, this year's free agent crop is really not all that lucrative. There's not a lot of big names in the free agent market, so I do think a lot of the NHL activity we're going to see during the summer months could certainly involve a lot of some significant trades. Now, let's jump in here. First off, I want to get started with the Anaheim Ducks. Now, in some recent comments made by GM Bob Murray, he's indicated that he's likely going to be shaking up his core a little bit more during the offseason. Of course, we saw him be very active at the trade deadline, but nothing too significant. We saw him trade some younger players like Andre Kasha and Nick Ritchie in exchange for some other younger assets in return as well. So clearly those were guys that were more of a supporting cast, but he felt like they could part with. One of the comments he made is he didn't feel like he was getting enough leadership out of his veterans and core players, and that they very well might be looking to make some more moves during the upcoming offseason. Now, some of these veteran players on the Ducks certainly did have some trade rumors circulating about them around the NHL trade deadline, but we didn't really see anything go down in that regard. The fact that he feels that they're lacking leadership around some of their core players certainly makes it sound like a trade could be coming to shake things up. I can't help but wonder if that might mean for Captain Ryan Getzlaf possibly leaving the Anaheim Ducks. Now, he does have a no trade clause, so they will have control over that, but he's entering the final year of his contract. Of course, the Ducks could also retain salary if need be. I mean, obviously, at this point, his cap hit is a little bit high for what he gives you in production, but he's still a very productive, very useful player, and really, for the most part, has been known as a pretty good leader. I'm not necessarily saying those comments that Bob Murray's made were aimed at Getzlaf per se, but he's certainly, if you look at contracts and where things are at in all their careers for the veteran guys, it does make a lot of sense that they may very well look to move on from a guy like Ryan Getzlaf. If you look at like Adam Henrique, for example, he still has like 4 or 5 years left on his contract. He's 30 years old. I really don't see that being an attractive contract to be sold. At the same time, you look at some veteran defensemen like a Josh Manson or Cam Fowler. To me, that doesn't make sense either. Clearly, the Ducks have had a lot of defensemen leave town via trade in the last number of years, and they are now at a point where they probably want to start to kind of adding back on the blue line, not subtracting even further. So to me, Getzlaf makes the most sense if Bob Murray is going to make a big move, but clearly he's going to have to work with him on that should they go down that road. But based on these comments, I expect some deals out of the Anaheim Ducks. And who do you think would make the most sense on the Ducks leadership core group of players that they could trade to really shake things up this summer? Now let's jump over and take a look at the New Jersey Devils. Now, many NHL insiders feel if current interim GM Tom Fitzgerald is given the full-time role, that we very well will see some more veteran players moved out. We'll continue to build around young players like Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier. Clearly, this Devils team is missing a lot of pieces, and those are the two main core guys, along with a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood, who he intends to build around. It's not a foregone conclusion he will become the full-time GM. It's been reported that they are reaching out to external candidates as well. One external candidate we are aware of that apparently has interviewed is former Vancouver Canucks GM Mike Gillis. Of course, he's been under the GM role for some time, but they are apparently looking to talk to other external parties. Of course, that could very well take some time, as a lot of these NHL teams are not likely going to grant permission to anybody currently working in the league until their season is over. So I guess we'll have to remain to be seen on if it's Fitzgerald or somebody else and what philosophy and policies they might be following here to get this New Jersey team back being competitive and continuing this rebuild on hopefully the right path. One name that comes to mind that very well could be revisited in a trade would be forward Kyle Palmieri. Now, of course, he had a lot of rumors surrounding him during the NHL trade deadline as well. We did see them move a guy like Blake Coleman. But Palmieri is a guy who's also not having a lot of time left on his contract. It's not really sure if it's a player that they want to re-sign to a longer-term deal. It's not really clear if he wants to sign a longer-term deal to remain with New Jersey, considering it could be a while before they're really competitive and consistently battling for an NHL playoff spot in a very tough Metropolitan Division. Clearly looking at how things are going in the Metro this year, yes, the Devils have a lot of work to do, but they have a lot of strong teams in that division, and it's going to take a lot of work and effort before they can really battle for those spots on a consistent basis. If they decided to trade Kyle Palmieri during the offseason, they likely would get a pretty decent return. Of course, during the summertime, teams tend to have more cap flexibility, which would make a deal like that a little bit more feasible, and at the same time, they get him on a full year term contract instead of a deadline acquisition. They could likely get a better return. Now, if the Devils don't go to the route of trading him, he very well could be one of the bigger names available at next year's NHL trade deadline, assuming that the New Jersey Devils are going to be likely in a similar situation and may not be playoff bound without having some drastic improvements next year. Now, there's been also some talk about the goaltending situation. Of course, Mackenzie Blackwood is going to be the main goaltender for the time being, but there is some talk and possibilities here that they very well might be looking to test the free agent market on goaltending this summer, and they very well could buy out the final couple years on the contract of goaltender Corey Schneider. Now, Schneider's gone downhill significantly in the past couple of years. Now, in Schneider's case, he's really battled a lot of injuries, and those injuries have taken their toll on his body, and he's just not quite the same goaltender. He's got long stretches without a win. He's really spent a lot of time in the minors as well. He's put through waivers, went unclaimed. I really think his NHL career is likely coming to a close here relatively soon, but obviously the New Jersey Devils will like to get away from that contract, create some more cap flexibility. Not that they necessarily need the cap flexibility though, because they do have a lot of younger players on cheaper contracts, but at the same time, it'd be nice to get another goaltender into the mix here, have that roster spot freed up, and if they could buy out the remaining contract of Corey Schneider, then they could certainly go shopping for a less expensive backup goaltender with a bit of experience who could mentor Blackwood over the next little while here as he works on becoming a more solid starting netminder. Now, next up, I want to take a look at the New York Rangers and their goaltending situation with Henrik Lundqvist. Now, the last number of weeks, we've had a 3-goaltender situation going on with the Rangers, with goaltender Igor Shesterkin getting the bulk of the starts and Alexander Georgiev getting most of the others and filling in as backup most of the time, with Henrik Lundqvist oftentimes either being the backup or being a healthy scratch and just not being on the bench at all. Obviously, Lundqvist has been the starting goaltender there for a long time, one of the greatest Ranger goaltenders ever in their franchise history, and it seems as though his time in New York might be winding down. Now, I know he's made it clear in the past that he is a Ranger and he intends to ride out the remainder of his contract and see this rebuild through and help this team in any way he's able to over the next remaining time he has left on his contract. But you can't help but wonder if they might talk to him this summer for a trade out of town. I just feel bad for the guy. I know he had a start for the first time in a long time against the Flyers a few days ago. Didn't look all that sharp. Didn't look all that good. They lost the game. And it's just kind of almost like it was set up to fail. I kind of feel that's how things are going for him with the Rangers. Not necessarily that anything's being done intentionally, but at the same time, the fact that he's had so little playing time, and when he's thrown into an important game the way he was, it just was, almost impossible for him to come out with a positive outcome. And it seems like the team is insisted on having Shesterkin be the starter, and they may not want to part with Georgiev. Both goalies have played pretty solid here, and it might make more sense for them to try to move Lundqvist in the final year of his $8.5 million contract. Clearly, that's a big cap hit. They could retain salary on a short-term basis since there's not a lot of time left on his contract, and maybe help him find a new home for the final year of his contract. Obviously, Lundqvist would have to be open to the idea and work with him where he has a no-move clause, but it just seems like the way the Rangers are going right now, that clearly he appears to be third on the list of their preference now. Of course, Georgiev could still possibly be traded. That wouldn't be a complete shocker, but it would make sense in a lot of ways for them to keep the 2 younger goalies and trade the veteran netminder. There's certainly a few teams out there that come to mind as likely being a good landing spot for him should they go ahead and make this move. There was some rumblings about him possibly going to the Avalanche earlier, but as I mentioned before, I'm not really sure there was a lot to those rumors. We've seen the Avs linked to a lot of veteran goaltenders, including Carey Price before, and I just don't think that there's really any truth or anything to those trade talks that have been going on or to those rumors. But at the same time, it would make sense, depending on how their current goalies do into the final stretch of the regular season, into the playoffs, they possibly could be on the market for an upgrade this coming year. That's just an example of where he could end up going. But either way, Lundqvist's time with the Rangers might be coming to a close. At least it sure looks like they would like to have it that way, considering how he's been treated and how little playing time he's had here down the stretch. Now, lastly, I want to touch on the Montreal Canadiens, on Marc Bergevin, and the possibility he could be looking to shake things up with a big trade this summer as well. And I also want to touch on the future of head coach Claude Julien. Now, I know there's seen lots of fans frustrated by the lack of successful results with the Habs, and many up there are calling for a change at the coaching helm as well. GM Marc Bergevin answered some questions on that at the GM meetings in Boca Raton, Florida. He was asked about the future of the head coach Claude Julien, and he definitely confirmed he would definitely be back next season. He seemed surprised that the question was even being posed. He said, Claude will be the coach in October, he will be the coach in November, he will be the coach in December. So clearly, as we know, Julien did sign, I believe it was a 5-year contract when he became head coach of the Habs. And considering they fired the previous coach, Michel Therrien, before his contract was up, maybe a lot of it has to do with contract. I don't know, but we've seen Bergevin be very, very patient with Therrien before he was let go. And even though many people think that Julien is part of the problem, not the solution, clearly Marc Bergevin and Habs ownership, Jeff Molson, do not necessarily feel that way. Giving him a vote of confidence this early to say he would be back next year is certainly quite big from that perspective. But there's been lots of other rumblings that they could be looking to make a significant trade to really shake things up. Marc Bergevin's had some confusing interviews here in recent weeks here since the NHL trade deadline, talking about it's a draft and development league and how they need to get younger and draft well and all those types of things. And then he was asked about shaking up his core players, and they just seem to be kind of going back and forth on the answers. And even though he appears to have a plan in place what he wants to do, a lot of people in the media and NHL insiders seem to be royally confused as to what exactly that plan is. But the latest talk is that he very well could be considering trading forward Jonathan Drouin, possibly for a top defenseman. Now, as we know, the Montreal Canadiens blue line is certainly could use some help back there. Obviously, Shea Weber, when he's healthy, has been tremendous for them. Jeff Petry's been pretty solid for them as well overall, but they do have some younger guys back there who could certainly use some additional help. And the one rumbling was that maybe Drouin could be moved to the Colorado Avalanche for a guy like a Samuel Girard, who could possibly be a top pairing left shot defenseman. Of course, Drouin could be reunited with his former junior teammate who he had a ton of success with, Nathan MacKinnon. MacKinnon and Drouin both played together with the Halifax Mooseheads and absolutely tore up the QMJHL, racking up tons of points. They were a dynamic duo there for quite a while, and it certainly would make sense that if he could find his offensive game again, maybe that would be a way to help him do that. Of course, Girard would be a tremendous help in Montreal. The Avalanche do have a lot of young defensemen that they very well could look to part with one. Of course, Cale Makar being the top prize possession. But they also have lots of other younger defensemen as well, like Byram and Timmins and Hellison. They could certainly part with one of them in order to bring back an additional forward piece or to help out with other areas of the team. So this is a type of deal that kind of does make sense. That could be good for both sides. Of course, we know the Montreal Canadiens were heavily scouting the Colorado Avalanche for multiple games, 2 to 3 games in Colorado leading up to the deadline. Of course, Joe Sakic was asked about Marc Bergevin's presence at their arena so much. He kind of laughed it off and said that Bergevin's daughter was going to school out there and that he was just probably out visiting family and taking in hockey games because he was a big hockey fan and loved the game. But you know what? As much as there could be some truth to that, I really don't think that's the case, at least not to that point where he's bears so much and he had one of his top assistants with him, Scott Mellanby. So clearly there was more to that than what Joe Sakic was letting on. Not that I expect him to divulge anything more to the public, but those two teams had a lot of conversations. But what was the deal they were discussing? What moves could we possibly see out of this team? Could it have actually been Drouin all along that the Habs were interested in, and that maybe the Habs were trying to decide what they would want in return? It's certainly difficult to say, but it is believed that Marc Bergevin might be looking to make a big trade this summer, and Drouin very well could be the focal point of that deal to try to help the blue line and move this team forward for some better results next season. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments about the fact that Claude Julien's going to be back coaching next year, and do you think the Habs need a big trade like a Jonathan Drouin for a top defenseman to really help this team get better and get better results for next season? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.